Hey guys, Daniel James here, and today it is my absolute honor to present to you the next generation of video games composers, the PAX panel. As I just mentioned, I am your host, Daniel James. I am a video game composer. I've worked on games such as Metal Gear Solid 5 and more recently MANEATER. But joining me today, we have from Call of Duty Modern Warfare and Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Sarah Schachner.
Hi.
From the Ori series and the upcoming Halo Infinite, we have Gareth Coker.
Hey, everyone.
From Metal Gear Solid 5 and Death Stranding, we have Ludvig Forssell.
Hello.
Hello. From Mortal Kombat 11 and Call of Duty World War II, we have Wilbert Roget.
Hey.
And finally, last but most certainly not least, from Doom and Wolfenstein, we have Mick Gordon. Let me do that again, Mick. Let me do that again. Let me do that again for you. And from Doom and Wolfenstein, we have Mick Gordon as he leaves.
Hey, Dan. Good to see you, buddy.
Brilliant. Okay, so first off, let me just thank you all for being here today. It's very exciting for me, particularly to be chatting with all of you in what I believe is the first ever online PAX. And there's obvious reasons for that, which neatly, in a rather unfortunate way, leads us to our first topic, COVID, and how it has impacted us as composers. Now, most of us here are what you would call freelance composers, meaning that we work independent from any particular game company or any publisher. Instead, we're hired out on a per project basis and generally either work out of our own studios or even out of our own homes. I personally work out of my own home. So for many of us, I imagine not too much has changed, right? But however, as I mentioned, we are joined today by someone who is the only person I believe here to be an in-house composer working at Kojima Productions. So Ludvig, to kick us off today, could you briefly tell those of us who are watching, but might not know much about it, how working in-house actually differs from freelance as a composer and how your work days have personally differed since it started?
Since what started? COVID?
Since COVID started, the pandemic, the lockdown.
Well, a lot's changed definitely, but to start off, obviously, working in-house means that I'm part of the production and development process from the very beginning to the very end. So simply, it might take me 4 years to ship one project.
Right.
So I don't think y'all spend that much time on most of the projects that you are on. It did take 4 years for us to ship our last game. So it's not just writing music, especially since I'm also the audio director. I'm in charge of the entire audio workflow and pipeline and making sure that the entire soundscape for the game ends up where we need it to be. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into my job that you guys don't have to worry about. And that can be interesting and also tedious and not so much fun, but it does mean that I get insight into every part of the production, and I'm there with the director every day, discussing how we actually want the game to sound, and it's very intimate in a different way maybe. But now with COVID, obviously, I've been working from home since March, and for me, it's been a great opportunity to kind of set up my own workspace at home. I'm in my own home studio right now, and my computer is actually sitting on a box of some more studio foam that I'm going to be setting up later today. For me, it's been a good opportunity actually to kind of get my own work environment going, and in terms of the actual work that I do currently, I don't really see a big difference because I can do everything I used to do in my studio at the studio from home. And I tend to, except for like when we're really in high production, keep to myself, just do everything in my own booth. And since we work a lot with the PlayStation people over in the States, I'm used to kind of working remotely with those guys anyways. So in terms of day-to-day life, once I got this all running, it hasn't changed a lot, except for like, personal things like not being able to meet friends and stuff like that. So that's pretty much where I'm at.
And one of the perks you have of being in-house as opposed to the rest of us as freelancers, you are there when the music is implemented into the game. Those are decisions that you actually get to decide. Whereas a lot of freelance composers, I think, Gareth, you were saying something about this the other day, like video game music is more than just music, right? Weren't you saying something along those lines? It's about the implementation. Maybe you could tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, it's super important, and not every game that you get to work on, not every developer you work with gives you that level of access. I mean, on Ori, I had, you know, a similar role. I get to decide like where the music gets to be played, but thank goodness I have no part in the technological aspect of like the actual technical coding side. I'm absolutely useless at that. So I play the game, I make a video of myself playing the game, I overlay my music and how I want it to play back, caption the video, send it off to the programming team, and pray that it comes back in a way that I wanted. And that's how it went on both Ori games.
Yeah, and Will, I was going to say, Will, you've worked both in-house and you are now freelance, so you've seen it on both sides of the world. So how important do you think, as a composer, having the being there at the implementation stage like Ludvig is? How do you think that compares to, say, like Gareth, where he has to make a video of the game in order to have something to react to? Like, which do you think has the greatest benefits? I mean, which ones were you in-house for and which ones were you freelance for, by the way? Maybe you can speak a bit about that as well.
Well, so when I was in-house, I mostly did Star Wars titles, Star Wars The Old Republic, Star Wars First Assault. And I worked a little bit on Force Unleashed as just an implementer, and I did the Monkey Island Special Edition games, again, as implementation and music supervision. I would say that, and this is kind of weird considering I spent like 5 years at LucasArts mostly doing implementation, but I think that the implementation and the tech should serve the music rather than the music being written to the implementation. That's just my personal thought on the matter. And I think that the industry is moving away from the whole like, hey, let's give a composer a big spreadsheet and then you have to neatly do all of these exactly. I think we're moving away from that.
That
instead,
knowing smile on everybody's face.
Yeah, we're moving beyond that. And now it's more about, okay, let's have the composer write pieces of music, almost like a through composed piece of art music in a way. And from there, we'll deliver on a bunch of stems, and then the music can be edited by the in-game team or by the composer if they have that ability or whatever. And then that's what creates the in-game assets. And in my opinion, that's when we should start thinking about the systems and like how things should work and all that. I worked with the Sony music team on Call of Duty World War II, and that's exactly the methodology they used. I just wrote these pieces, which coincidentally are exactly what shows up on the Call of Duty album. And that's what I delivered. And then from there, they edited and kind of did their magic and grew it into like 8 hours of content or something crazy like that for the actual in-game playback. As a composer, I feel very grateful that I do know how to implement, and I've designed a lot of music systems myself. There's a lot of really nice back and forth between me and the Sony team about how I think things should work and how we can make different types of interactive music come together, which is a perspective that would be difficult to give if you're not as familiar with the tech and whatnot.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's the music that counts, because chances are, especially now that the industry has developed so much, chances are there's someone on the team who is very good at editing and implementing the music as is needed for the game to really shine.
So do you think implementation is a skill within itself, or do you think it should be left to the composer, perhaps? What do you think?
It's its own skill. It's a whole other thing. Sound design goes through this as well, by the way. There's technical sound designers, and then there's the more asset-heavy sound designers. I think it's great to know both. Just in the same way that if you were writing for a film, it would be great if you know about editing, if you know about all the different types of shots and all that. Just knowing the craft and knowing the field, it's never a bad thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, this isn't a question I had prepared, but I think one of the best...
Daniel, real quick, I just want to give a shout out to the Sony PlayStation music team. I think, I guess me, Will, and Sarah as well. I've worked with those guys quite a bit, and
don't you worry, amazing. We have a whole section about collaboration coming up. We will get to it. But no, this isn't a question I had prepared, but one of the best examples of implementation I think I've ever seen in my life was in Killer Instinct, which Mick, you actually worked on. Now, how involved were you with the implementation of that? For those who haven't played the game and don't know what I'm talking about, they're like super combo moves, correct? And when you're performing these combos, every single hit of the combo is in sync with a downbeat in the music, and it all comes together in this cacophony of just violence and awesomeness. Like, can you tell us a bit about how the process of getting that kind of to the point music implemented into the game, how that was as someone outside of the implementation stage?
Yeah, I wish I could do it again today. It would be much easier with the tools that we have now. Now it's so much easier to put a small chunk of music into whatever you're using, and the system already knows the length of whatever that is, and you can use the length of that to drive something like the time of an animation. So like an uppercut, for example, might be 6 frames, for example, and you can slow those down so it's exactly the length of the music. You can do that now. When we did it then, it was more of a smoke and mirrors attempt. So it was a lot of back and forth with the animation team and literally trying to reverse engineer this piece of music that might be at 176 beats per minute. That means that every beat is however milliseconds long, so we need to make every punch and kick in this sequence that many milliseconds, and it will be fine. So like a quarter note was this many milliseconds, an eighth note was this many milliseconds, etc. But yeah, no, I always do the implementation. I literally will sit here and open up WISE, and I will do all the implementation stuff here, and then I send that straight to the developers here through some sort of VPN or source control or something. Yeah,
so that what you're describing there is sort of like somewhere in between the in-house person and the composer. So like me, for example, I've always been able to send my music to someone who implements it into the game for me. Like, I'm very fortunate in that, and I understand that. And whereas like Ludvig, for example, is implementing it into the actual game along with his team. What you were talking about there using WWII, for those watching, WWII is like a middleware piece of software. So it's like, it's a piece of software that game developers use that's already created in a way that allows music to be dynamic and change between cues, between songs, like very easily. And so what Mick was describing there is composers actually have the ability to learn this skill and do it for themselves. They get to work and test their own implementation out themselves and send that to the game developers, which is actually a step off of their backs. And mostly they tend to appreciate it. Well, if you're doing it well, if you're doing it bad, I guess they don't. But if you're implementing it well, that's a step off of their back. But anyway, so as Ludvig did mention earlier, he brought it up, like collaboration during COVID has been the biggest thing to impact us. Like being able to collaborate with other musicians, as you know, it's just become tougher. But more so, even composing with even collaborating with other composers is pretty tricky. However, some of us have indeed found solutions. So Sarah, you recently released your Assassin's Creed Valhalla main theme, which was incredible, by the way. But it was itself a collaboration, correct, between you, Jasper Kid, and Aino. Why don't you tell us a bit about that? And maybe also, while you're on the subject, maybe tell us what it was like working on an established franchise like Assassin's Creed, and maybe working with the Sony guys. Good time to bring that up too.
Sure, for sure. Well, going back to the theme, I've never collaborated on a main theme for, I don't think, none of us had. So it was a new experience to have to write one piece of music all together. It's like, how do you do that? We can't even get together and work out ideas in the same room. So, you know, luckily the internet exists, and Jesper had started on a melodic idea, and then he got something going that would have like a very somber and emotional tone to it, and then he sent it over to me, and then I arranged it and produced it out and added to it, and then we got it to a place where it was solid and ready for Einar to do his magic on it. And he sang, and I mean, his voice is incredible. So anything he adds to it,
right?
Yeah.
And what was it like working on like an such an established franchise like Assassin's Creed? Not your first one, right?
No, I actually started way back on Black Flag, and then I co-scored Unity, and then I did Origins on my own, and then this was back to a collaboration again. So it's been quite a while. It's kind of my whole career has been with Assassin's Creed, so it feels comfortable for me. Yeah. Like home base, kind of.
Yeah. And Ludvig, you were bringing up like collaboration during this time. Like you had to collaborate with the Sony guys. And this is something, from what I understand about the Sony guys is they are set up for remote collaboration anyway, correct? And so how has that been? How is collaborating during COVID, particularly with the Sony guys? Why don't you tell us a bit about that, Ludvig?
Well, I just recently started back up working with the Sony guys because obviously we finished our last project last year, and I mean they've been set up to work from home, all of them as well, since earlier this year, and not much changes for me, especially since I'm based in Japan. It's pretty much the same thing. We do our Skype calls, and we send out emails and send mock-ups back and forth, trying to figure things out. I think something that sort of is different for me in this sense, being the guy at Kojima Productions in this instance, is that in terms of collaboration, I'm not I'm pretty much the guy giving everybody the work and telling people what to do. It's not as much, but they do give me a lot of great feedback and ideas, and we try to make it as a collaborative process as possible. But as a different example, me and you, when we worked on Metal Gear, I'd send out like text-based ideas for like cues that I wanted you to write, and give you direction that way. And you'd give me something and I'd give you feedback, and it'd be a back and forth that way. I don't really think we got to collaborate and ask I would consider that. Sorry, I'm just saying that what Sarah was talking about sounded like really awesome as two composers working together that way, and that's something that I definitely want to try out going forward. But like in our case, it especially being so far apart even before COVID and all that. Well, that was sort of different.
Worth saying, like when I was working on Metal Gear Solid 5, Ludvig was based out of Tokyo, Japan, and I was based in a little village in the UK called Battle, and I did the whole thing from there, and we had Skype calls, and like composers are generally reactive beasts, you know what I mean? Like all it takes is give us a picture and we'll be able to interpret and feel what that is as music, So a lot of collaboration in that regard is quite easy to do, even with COVID. It's more like what Sarah was saying. It's like when you're working on tracks and with other people recording, that's probably the biggest aspect that's changed. However, like all of our collaboration doesn't necessarily come from within industry. So Mick, you've composed some of the most incredible video game music, with Doom and Wolfenstein. But more recently, your music caught the eye of a hugely successful metal band called Bring Me the Horizon, which in itself has something of a fun quarantine story to it. So I'll let you tell that. But what you're telling, why don't you also tell us a bit about how your work in that world is differing from your music in the video game world?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's interesting, like, obviously the whole COVID thing has affected everybody, right? It's extraordinary. And different industries and different individuals are being affected in different ways. And of course, live touring musicians have been affected very, very strongly. There are no tours, there are no live shows, there's no festivals, there's none of this stuff at the moment, right? So, what's the upside of that is that there's a lot more music being written and worked on and collaborated with and produced and things like that. And Ollie, the singer from Bring Me the Horizon, tells a really cool story where he was just doing some game time, and he got a copy of Doom Eternal, and he was playing through it. And he's quite a keen gamer, so he was he's pretty much up with everything and what's going on and all that sort of thing, which is cool. And he just had this sort of idea, like, hey, wouldn't it be cool to kind of work together on a couple of things? So they reached out and we got chatting about it, and it was really cool. He's a very much a you're very fortunate in life to meet certain people that are like these just creative forces of nature. And Ollie is definitely one of them. He's an idea printer. He just prints good ideas, right? He's constantly working on stuff all the time, right? And he sent me like this, what I would call a design document for the song. It's like a 10-page document that talked about the ideas behind it, the meanings behind the lyrics, different ideas and films and images and books that had inspired the music. And this was the method of collaboration, which I love because it's not so much speaking on like musical terms. It's not like this kick drum here or this synth part here, etc. It's more like a higher level creative conversation based around concepts. So he had very strong concepts in mind of what he wanted the song to sound like. And, you know, through this document, he relayed those concepts to me. And then it's my job to kind of interpret those concepts the way I would. And to me, that's a proper collaboration. And going to the second part of your question there, I'm finding at the moment I'm enjoying a lot more of this producer role with bands and working with different musicians and acts and artists and things and producing albums and stuff is something that I'm kind of enjoying a lot more at the moment. There is a lot more creativity involved. On games, sometimes you're very much like in this box, right? And there might be these sort of things that you want to go off and explore, but it doesn't relate to the game. So you have to kind of rein it in to get back into this sort of nice, tight fitted, sort of thing of the game, right? And with music and with producing acts and things, it's great because we can just go off and explore these wonderful untapped worlds of creative possibilities. So I'm really enjoying that at the moment, for sure.
Yeah, so did you feel that your production skills that you've developed in the video games industry translated one-to-one to working on records, or did you have a lot more to learn once you made the jump over to doing the band music?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest difference, other than that whole creative push thing, is this like strive for perfection. You know, there's a real thing when working on a deadline that you get it to a state, and then when the deadline hits, sometimes you just have to relinquish it, right? You just have to let it go and move on to the next thing. And with this stuff, it's like, man, we can just spend the time to get the phase of the bass part perfectly in line with the phase of the kick drum, right? So the speaker is pushing in the most perfect way. And we can take the time to do that. And, so I'm enjoying that high level of perfectionism that it's an itch that I can get to scratch for a little while.
That is awesome. So we have covered the difficulties of collaborating with other creatives and also with other musicians, but on a small scale. But what happens in a COVID world when you want to record a big ensemble like a full orchestra, which brings me tidily back to Gareth. So Gareth, unless I am mistaken, you have recorded both before and during COVID, right? Larger ensembles. So why don't you tell us a bit about, firstly, how much fun that is as a composer, because a lot of people watching this are not musicians. So getting to work with hundreds of live musicians, but also, tell us how it differs now that you're in a COVID world.
Well, it was daunting on Ori because I was working on Ori and Halo at the same time, which I can actually now tell people. So because I couldn't at the time. So we had an Ori recording in December and January, and a Halo recording sandwiched between those two Ori recordings. That was all pre-COVID. So I did 3 transatlantic flights. Well, I guess it's 6 transatlantic flights in the space of 5 weeks, which was pretty terrifying. But then you get to the studio and then there's 40, 60, 80 musicians waiting to play, and then you just sit there and hope you haven't screwed anything up. And thankfully it turned out pretty good on Ori, and we've actually finished the music for Halo as well. So but the first Halo recording, which was done in December, was obviously pre-COVID. The second and third round was done after March, and the biggest difference is the musicians, at least where we were recording in London, now all have to be spaced out, and there is a limit on how many players they can have in the room. And let's just take the string section, for example. Now, normally when you go see an orchestra, they're all sitting pretty close together so they can hear each other play, and it really helps like their tuning and intonation. But now they're all spaced out. They're like socially distanced all around the hall. They've like measured it out. They've got these really specific setups. And so the microphone setup is completely different. And so when you're trying to like mix the final track, it doesn't sound different because the engineers have figured, thankfully there are very smart people who are working on all of that, much smarter than I am, who have managed to make the new microphone setup match what we had in the pre-COVID recording. But one of the things we did find when recording choir, because they had to be socially distanced as well, much more as well, because they can't wear masks for obvious reasons. So the string players can wear masks, but choir can't. But we actually found that we, not just we, the composers and the music team, but also the engineer preferred the new mic setup for the choir just because it was better suited for what we were doing on Halo, which it was just an unexpected thing. He said he might do it going forward on other projects. Wow. And it's a mic setup we'd have never ever discovered were it not for the virus. I mean, it's obviously not the kind of way you want to discover a new recording technique, but it's something. It's a byproduct of what happened.
So you're telling me, Gareth, that you managed to pull the one good thing out of COVID?
Yeah, I mean, as everyone said, it's been pretty rough. I think, like, also, I mean, one thing that I think's been interesting is seeing how many players who have been playing in orchestras their whole life have now been able to, transition into recording at home, and realizing that there's actually quite a lot of us who want to hire people all the time. And I think composers now are looking, because we can't record as easily with musicians like in the same space, we want to hire musicians remotely. And all I'd say is, if you're a musician watching this, I'm sure there are musicians watching this, and if you've got some serious skill, get your stuff out there. Because I found several of my collaborators on YouTube. Like one in particular who I know Will's worked with as well. I think Will knows who I'm going to mention. It's Kristen. She did a cover of a track from Ori and the Blind Forest. I was like, who is this? This is amazing. And then I found out that she plays like 6 million instruments, all wind based. And then on Ori and the Will of the Wisps, she played 21 of those wind instruments. And yeah, it's so if you're a musician, right now there's a lot of us composers who are looking for different collaborators. So get your stuff out there.
Yeah. And Sarah, I saw you jump up there. Like you too have found musicians from YouTube, but as well as that, you will record a lot of your own at home, right? For your game scores.
Yeah, I typically play as many of the instruments as I can myself. I play string instruments, so that translates to quite a few things, but I'm always looking for unusual instruments or just interesting artists that I can collab with. So actually on Valhalla, I did a remote session in Scotland a couple months ago, right at the beginning of the pandemic. So it was crazy because we were like, oh my God, we might not be able to do it. And it was real stressful trying to sort it out. But luckily it was just one player. He plays, he's like the only person, one of the only people in the world that plays this ancient Celtic war horn. It's like an untempered, long, huge brass tube that has a face on the end. I thought it was a dragon, but it turns out it's like a pig, which is not as cool. But it's just like so haunting and eerie, and because it's untempered, which means it doesn't have like buttons that you press down that tune the notes for you like a modern brass or wind instrument. It just has a natural series of harmonics, and to get any of the notes in between, you have to bend it with your mouth. And this guy, like, he's an amazing trombone player. He played with Frank Sinatra, and he's also a professor and an expert in history. So he was like the perfect person to have on board for Assassin's Creed. And we did a remote session. I was on Zoom for 8 hours, and it somehow went okay. And he played some like shells too, a bunch of different things, but that was the main instrument.
Sarah, how did you discover that instrument in the first place?
Actually, this is kind of a funny story. So not many people know, but I had a Viking ship in my backyard when I was a kid. Like a real actual Viking ship. A full-size, realistic replica from the Leif Erikson Society, and it had gotten in, it had some damage and they couldn't sail it anymore. So there was an ad in my small town paper saying that they were going to sell it or burn it. And it just, my sister and I were like 5 and 7, and we were obsessed with Vikings when we were little. I don't know why, but we just were. And, we're asking my parents for a Viking ship. They're like, that's insane. You can have a swing set, but you can't just have a Viking ship. And then this ad appears like the next week. It was just very serendipitous. And my dad like bargained them down from $7,000 to $700 for the ship. So we got it, and we had it for many years. And so I feel like my life has come full circle to now get to score Assassin's Creed Valhalla. It's like achievement unlocked. I've done it all. Awesome. But awesome. Wait, what was the question? Oh, that's not how I found it. So the guy that sold us the boat, I'm friends with him on Facebook, and he tagged me in a YouTube video of this guy playing this incredible instrument. And it had just kind of been in my head and in my ear for a while, and then
YouTube.
On YouTube, yeah. I tracked him down. I tracked him down, and it worked out. So YouTube is awesome.
Yeah.
That's
so
great.
Ludvig, as a Swede, do you have your own Viking ship?
No
I'm
comment.
disappointed. I am disappointed. So, I briefly mentioned it earlier, but all of us on the panel today share something quite unique. That being that we have all worked on previously established franchises. We've all stepped in to carry on the mantle. I, for one, was lucky enough to write music for Metal Gear Solid 5, which is genuinely the reason I'm a composer in the first place. The Metal Gear series was one I always wanted to be in. And as we mentioned earlier, Ludvig was actually the person who got me on board there, and it was, you know, a great collaboration. So Ludvig, why don't you tell us about what it was like to pick up the torch, not only composing, but becoming eventually the audio director for Kojima Productions and working on a game with such a fantastic musical legacy like Metal Gear?
Yeah, obviously it was super scary and daunting and all that shit. Especially since it was my it was my first big job that I was gonna do, and picking up the mantle of that franchise, especially with having such a strong musical identity, I think was very scary. However, what kind of made it interesting or made it doable for me in a way was they from the very get-go, from the very start, they decided to go in a totally different direction this time, which was to some maybe giving up on what made the music special, but because people like what used to be. Like that's what's going to happen when you're stepping in such a established, well-known franchise. But it was refreshing for me as a composer being able to step in and do something different than just trying to mimic what Harry Gregson Williams had done before. Right. But having done that, and now having done something that was completely new, a completely new franchise for the same guy who did Metal Gear, that you can see the good sides to both of it, I think. Having something that's been done and trying to redo that is one challenge, and then having something that's completely new and trying to come up with something from the ground up. I think in the end, having it be such a hard, difficult challenge is kind of what made it fun and made it worthwhile for me. I don't think I was as like with you, Daniel, you basically told me like first time we met that your goal in life was to work on Metal Gear.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
I think I sort of in a way stumbled into that role. So it was great being able to work with you on that, to have that like, I don't know, like your interest in the project kind of refueled my interest in the project as well.
And you know, obviously, you know, being a fan of the music, I had a few comments of my own about keeping certain musical legacies going and whatnot. But you know what I mean? At the end of the day, it was. But Will, you've worked on quite a few, right? So you've worked on not only Mortal Kombat, but a Call of Duty and Star Wars, you know, not a small one.
And a little bit of Guild Wars and Destiny and Lara Croft.
So you've done this a few times, to say the least. So for you, which one meant the most and which one was the most challenging?
So I have a weird story, maybe not quite as weird as Sarah's Viking ship, but so what the first birthday party that I ever went to from a classmate, I was like 10, 12 or something like that. And it was at an arcade, and they had Mortal Kombat there. And it was my first video game because I didn't really grow up with video games. And I was like, whoa, this is so realistic. It's just like real life. It's just like a movie. Oh my gosh, it's so amazing. And that game is what got me into video games, the martial arts, a lot of different types of music that I wasn't familiar with before. And it was just a huge part of my life for all throughout middle school and high school. I actually wanted to be an action star before the whole music thing happened, believe it or not.
You still can be, Will.
Well, I'd have to grow about a foot. But
I thought you were one.
Oh, yeah. But no, that all happened. And then I got really into video game composition more traditionally, and I went through the whole college thing and started working in the industry. And it came full circle when I finally reached out to NetherRealm Studios. It turned out that some of the people who worked on Call of Duty World War II had also worked on sound design there. And so I got the introduction, and I was hired to work on Mortal Kombat 11, which was an absolute dream come true. I'm sure that the audio directors, by the way, Dan Forden, the original composer of Mortal Kombat, is still there and still writing for all the games.
Right.
I'm sure they're so annoyed with all my fanboying constantly. Every Skype meeting, I would just be going off. But you've got to think, these are characters that I'd lived with for like 20 years. And now I get to give them a unique voice. They never actually had character themes, but for MK11, that was kind of my goal, was to give themes to every single character. Yeah. And so it's like, finally, I get to be the one to give Katana a voice, to give, Total Khan, all these characters that had been around forever. So that was just an incredible privilege. With Call of Duty, it was a little different because that's a franchise, and I'm sure, Sarah can attest to this. That's this franchise that's basically involved the biggest possible names in Hollywood. I mean, Hans Zimmer, Brian Tyler, Sarah obviously did the one right before me, and that's like some pretty freaking big shoes to fill. Definitely check out Infinite Warfare and Modern Warfare. Sarah, you did an incredible job with those. But now here's me, and that was kind of my first sort of huge title. I can't say that was an easy score to write. It was.
Unless I'm mistaken, didn't you do that all in one project? You did that all in one big.
Yeah, I did it in one. So I use Reaper. That's my music program. And yeah, it's all just one giant, like 3 hours or something project file that I kind of went through. That's a whole technical thing. There's reasons why I did it. It's not.
That's an incredible way to work, though.
You know what? It kind of brings up an interesting point. I feel like what I had to learn for the Call of Duty World War II score was how to create what I might call a monochromatic sound of a score. The modern Hollywood way of producing, in my opinion, this is just opinion, is that they look for one sound, and that's the sound of the game, of the film, of whatever. But they want that sound to be very unique, so that you could listen to maybe 5 seconds of a score and know that's this, and so having that one project file set up really facilitated that for me. I came up with this concept that I called the Haze of War, where I took different authentic World War II recordings of weapons and artillery and vehicles and whatnot, and I processed them to be a part of the orchestra and substituted out different orchestral percussion instruments for that. So like, instead of a cymbal crash, you might hear explosion debris, that kind of thing. And then I married that with a lot of very 20th century unusual orchestral techniques like overpressure and all kinds of different things you can do with strings and brass, and percussive things as well with all the instruments. And this all kind of came together to illustrate this sort of bluish gray haze that I saw in the art direction. And that's what sort of inspired my creative direction for the whole score. And then even harmonically, I figured out slightly synesthetic, sort of these different harmonies that worked as well with that sort of blue-gray desaturated haze that the game was doing. And so having just one big file meant that I could take some of my sound designs that I did in this cue over here and then bring it over and, immediately start off, or, any other weird tweaking, I don't have to do it over and over again.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, dude. And I just thought of this question on the spot, but so you have worked on some of the biggest names in video games, right, Will? When you get into that inevitable conversation we've all been in, right? I'll act it out for you. What do you do for a living? I'm a composer. Anything I've heard of? What do you lead with? What do you lead with? Out of all those games, what's the first one that comes to, what's the one that you're proudest of? The one the one you lead with when you're telling people, well, actually, yes, you might have heard of some of it. Have you heard of Star Wars?
I mean, once again, thank you so much for having me on this panel, because I am surrounded by 17 different huge franchises that y'all have been working on. That's incredible to me. But I think you can all agree with me that it's really difficult to say, which one of your children do you love the most? You really become very attached to every single project you're on. So what I would lead off with is just the most recent one that I've done, which is Mortal Kombat.
I would definitely be going Metal Gear.
In my, yeah, I mean, well, I think probably for the same reason that, growing up, Metal Gear was very important to you. It was very important to me as well. I love the Metal Gear series and its music. And by the way, you guys did an incredible job with that Metal Gear 5 score.
Thanks,
but, Mortal Kombat has been in my life for longer than any of the others. So I would probably, I guess,
lead with Mortal Kombat. The one that comes from the heart. That's how I approach it. It's the one that means the most. That's awesome. So Mick, you've done a whole bunch too. So there's Need for Speed, there's Killer Instinct, Doom, Wolfenstein. So do you feel any extra pressure on when you're working on something that already had a musical voice? And how does it compare, that pressure, how does that compare to coming up with something completely original? I mean, on some of your projects, you were doing kind of a blend of the two in some spots, right? So where did you feel the most pressure?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really tough question. So I find like I've been really fortunate over the last couple of years to have this sort of, interesting position of bringing these franchises back from, upwards of 20 years ago, like Will said. And sort of giving them a modern coat, for a modern audience. And that for me, that process just starts the same way, which is, having conversations with the people that you're working with and having conversations with the developers. And that's something that I enjoy the most. And, we can spend hours talking about all sorts of things. And it can be, what their goals are with the franchise and where they want to take it and what their target market is and all this sort of thing. That's all great. But it's also like, what are their nostalgic memories of the franchise? What elements stood out to them? Because, I mean, I'm sure Will's story with Mortal Kombat is Will's own unique experience, right? And somebody else's unique experience of Mortal Kombat will be different as well. So it's important to find out, like, who's working on it and what they're trying to do. So specifically with something like Wolfenstein, bringing that franchise into, 2014, 15, 16, whatever onwards, it was a completely new thing. It wasn't anything to do really with the original Wolfenstein games at all. Whereas something like Doom and definitely Killer Instinct still needed to feel like a Doom game or needed to feel like Killer Instinct. And that process is just an analytical one, sort of going through and trying to put yourself in the same headspace that Robin Beanland or Bobby Prince would have been in when they were working on that stuff originally. And they're trying to get yourself into that same mindset now and use modern philosophies and techniques and tools and all this cool stuff that we can do to kind of do much the same thing. I'm not a believer in that I want to do tributes to the past, like just give it a sort of like a retro sort of fake historical recording sort of vibe or anything. It just needs to capture the same feeling that it was at the time. So with Doom, it's talking to people that were involved and hearing the love of thrash music and, metal culture and muscle cars and jeans and mullets and all that sort of stuff, and trying to find out what the modern equivalent of such thing is for today. And if you do that, you kind of get pretty close. It's very much a process.
So your research was more about finding out how the old music made you feel as opposed to what the actual themes were. And so it was about going into the spirit of it more so than the actual melodies or the actual movements of it.
Yeah, the themes for me are very important though, because that's the musical fabric of the universe of that game. So Doom has a musical fabric and Killer Instinct has a musical fabric and Wolfenstein has a musical fabric. And so pulling the themes out, you're definitely, instantly in that world. But the goal isn't to make it sound like it came from the 90s. You need to give it a modern production process.
Yeah. And that's what I meant, just how it made you feel. Like we all remember the we all remember that and how it felt at the time. And you just brought that to the forefront. That feeling of that heaviness you made real now, given the technology we have.
Yeah, and you really have to kind of step aside your own nostalgia with that in a way, because I chat to folks quite often that feel that Metallica is the heaviest band that ever existed, right? That's the heaviest shit that's ever been, right? Great. And that is to them, which is cool. But if you play Metallica to a 12-year-old, to them it sounds like dad's music. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you pull that sort of thing from the past, you're pulling the generations from the past, you're pulling all that stuff across. Whereas you need to give the modern audience something that makes them feel that this is the heaviest thing that's ever been, That's the way I like to do it.
That's awesome, dude. But Gareth, you can't talk too much about your previously established franchise, which is Halo, but can you tell us a little bit about your general reaction to when you first realized you were going to be jumping in on something as big as Halo, and maybe compare it a bit to how it felt right into something completely unique like Ori?
Well, I think that's actually the most interesting part for me, is because I look back now, and actually Halo is literally the first franchise I've stepped into. Everything else I've ever worked on has been a new IP from scratch, excluding the Minecraft stuff, but they were kind of like standalone expansions. So you step into this world, and it was literally just an email that came in my inbox, and it's like, would you like to work on Halo? Well, let me think about that for a second. It's like, so I do a pitch, and it all works out. But then, and Mick touched on this with Doom. You have to, like, it's been a long time since I played, especially the original Halo games. And when I was playing the original Halo games, I wasn't taking composing seriously. I definitely wasn't a professional at the time. I can be honest and say that I found like the beginning tough, because you have to learn a whole new musical language vocabulary that you didn't create. And because I've been so used to that for my entire career, it's like, okay, well, I need to really go and study like the original music by Marty and Michael, and then Halo 4 and Halo 5 with Kazuma and Neil Davidge, and then Tom Seltzer's work. And it's like this huge amount of music that's been written, and it's all got to be looked at. And then I'm like, well, it's not enough to listen. It's not enough to listen to the music. I've got to go back and see why people love the music and how it feels in the game. So yeah, I mean, pretty much like when I found out that I was struggling to capture the sound, I was like, okay, let's forget about like trying to make it sound like what's come before, and let's just go and play the games again. Oh, my life is so tough. I have to play video games. So I literally played through not everything from start to finish, but like most of the games, like 2/3 of the way through, because time is not as plentiful as it used to be. And that just gave me a greater understanding of like everything that 343 Industries were talking about. And then like I started to get in sync with the project finally, and because I'd learned the language, and I'd learned why the language existed in the game, the musical language. So that was like a process that took a bit longer, because I wasn't as used to it. And what we've put out 3 tracks already for Halo Infinite, kind of 3 previews, and they're like, it's so interesting reading the comments, because obviously there's going to be comments because it's got such a rich musical history, and it's like, yeah, with their clear throwbacks to things that have been done before. But it's like, man, I can't wait for like to see where people are either going to love it or they're going to hate it, like, because we have, we've taken things, we've taken things to a new place as well. So the score, at the beginning, it was tough because we're like doing the callbacks to the past, but because of the nature of the game, we were allowed to like push the boundaries, especially towards the end of production. I mean, one of the reasons we haven't been able to preview the new stuff is because it's still being mixed. But yeah, it was definitely like a daunting prospect to be stepping into something that big. But I think the other thing is I had a partner in crime on this. It was also the first time I'd done a collaboration with another composer. There's 2 other composers on the project, Curtis Schweitzer and Joel Korolitz. And yeah, like we're all reporting to a music supervisor who is like making sure that we don't do anything too crazy and weird, making sure that we're all staying within the Halo universe and that the language that's been created, and expanding on it in little bits and pieces. But we're all kind of going through the same thing. So if ever we're like, oh my god, we're struggling with a certain cue, we just like it's a late night rant or a late night email, and then we get through it and then get it done.
Did you find that the pressure was less, or at least diminished, because you got to spread, not the work, but you got to spread the load with some extra other composers? Like, did you feel that like, okay, because I have a team of talent around me, a talent with me, the pressure's going to be a bit lower? Or was that Halo name just bearing down on you like an LA sun in summer?
At the end of the day, I think like whether it's Halo or Ori or literally anything I work on, I mean, I feel like I try to treat everything like it's the last thing I'm going to do, because you just like, I think we all feel very fortunate to be able to like do this for a living.
Absolutely.
I can, yeah. So it's like, they're all like equally important. Obviously, you know, the legacy does linger, but it's like, I'm writing music at the end of the day. I need to like make sure I'm focused on what I'm doing. But one thing that's interesting that you mentioned that is a big difference for me. On Ori, I'm literally in charge of everything, probably not dissimilar to Ludwig, and like with, you know, I'm, you know, choosing the orchestrators, you know, getting all the music printed, flying, booking the damn flights, like for my teams, you know, all of that stuff. And on Halo, I had to do absolutely none of it, and it was glorious. Like, yeah, because the music supervisor took care of everything. Like, I'm not used to that. Maybe the other people are, the other composers on this panel are, but it's like, so that was a new thing. So that like a lot of the pressures that I'm used to, and I don't mind it. I'm actually like kind of a control freak. So like relinquishing this amount of control was very, very new to me. But actually, it kind of came at a good time, because I like finishing Halo is coming off the back of Ori, which like really took it out of me. And then not having to worry about like a bunch of extra like logistical stuff made it so I could really just focus on the music and delivering exactly what they wanted for the game.
When you're working with an orchestra, there's so much that you completely forget that you have to deal with. Like, you realize someone has to physically print out every page of music, right? And like tape it, and you forget about those things unless it's suddenly Guild Wars the night before the session, and you're like, oh yeah. And then you have to get a posse together to just madly tape, you know, thousands of pages of stuff.
Wow, that's mental, man. Sarah, so you already spoke a bit about Assassin's Creed and all the different, you know, franchises, all the different entries in the franchise that you did there. But you also, as mentioned earlier, worked on both Call of Duty Modern Warfare and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. So for you, I'm curious as to what it felt like the first time you came into an established franchise in general. I mean, I know that you did some before Call of Duty, but like, if you want to speak more specifically to Call of Duty, like, how did it compare being in Call of Duty for the first time with the legacy it comes with? And then how did that change once you moved on to it for the second time? Did you feel the same pressure? Was it the same, or did you feel like, I've got this?
Well, the first time with Infinite, I actually that was the first AAA game that, well, aside from Unity, I don't really count that because I only did some of the music. It was a collab. Yeah. But Infinite Warfare was the first one that I was fully handling myself, and I got it at the same time that I got Origins. I really didn't think I was going to get both. So I was excited for a day, and then I was like, oh my God, like the panic set in of like, not only am I doing my first AAA game by myself, I have to do two of them on the same timeline. So that was a really hard 2 years, but I was also so excited to be doing. I like just shut my doors for like 2 years and just was in my studio working day after day. But yeah, I mean, there was definitely pressure, but I feel like with Infinite Warfare, because it was sci-fi and it was kind of going so far off the path of what was normal for Call of Duty, that I didn't feel as much of a pressure to like sound like it had sounded, and they wanted something different. So that was really exciting, and I was so grateful to have that opportunity. And then with Modern Warfare, while I did feel like I had more experience and I was more prepared for it, there's a whole pressure that comes with Modern Warfare, and like the last, the nostalgia of Hans Zimmer and Lauren Balfe, and just the love that everyone has for that game was fantastic. I think everyone just has such fond memories of the music and the experience of that game. So, there's pressure, there's nostalgia pressure, and but again, they wanted something different. They wanted it to be like a grown-up version of Modern Warfare, like more mature, more serious. So I still felt like there was a lot of room to take this, like you had said before, take the spirit of the past and do something modern, like what Mick was saying, package it up for the modern audience. And I felt like I got to just do my own thing. And it was awesome. Yeah.
Like finding out what it was about the scores from the past that people loved and trying to tap into that through line and keep that happiness trail going. I mean, I did get to work on a couple of Call of Duties myself, but only helping out Jack Wall on the Black Ops 3 and 4. So I didn't feel the same pressures you guys felt, but like, it is a daunting task when you see the words Call of Duty on the project folder and you're like, shit. Like I tweeted this out the other day, but I do wish game developers in general would do it more often. And that is give their composers moments in the game where musically they have the opportunity to open up and thematically put their piece. The best example I can think of off the top of my head right now is the beginning of Ghost of Tsushima. And you are locked in a camera position as you're riding up to the open field for the first time. And the big theme kicks in. The camera isn't locked, but the player control is. So that as you come out into the field, you get the big main theme for the first time. Now, I think that as composers, we should be given those opportunities more. We should be given the opportunity to spread that theme. What do you guys think?
I think that there's been certain advancements, shall we say, in cinema, in Hollywood, and how things are shot. And I guess I use the term advancements quite loosely because it's been more like, shorter and shorter attention span, faster, quick cuts and everything has to be very snappy. On Mortal Kombat, I was very lucky in that our cinematics director, Marty Stoltz, he's very old school. He's very 80s, 90s action movie style. He's not modern at all. And so he would give me these moments where nothing is happening. Like if you look at this game's story mode and how often characters are just walking, and that's it. No one's fighting, no one's talking, it's just walking. There's so much of that, but they gave me an immense opportunity to develop themes, to really just emote and have the space to do that. Whereas, on other titles, you might have to just very quickly get something in and then move on. Or more likely, you would just kind of establish a groove and then let it sit and not really have the opportunity to go in very deep. It's difficult for them to do that because, remember, they're going to be sitting there with no music, or temp music, which who knows what that's going to be, for most of the development. So it's quite difficult. But I mean, again, on MK11, I was very lucky that they afforded those opportunities to do that. Yeah.
One of my favorite moments in video game history, musical moments, is actually one of Ludvig's from Death Stranding. There's this moment, and I won't spoil it, but there's a moment at the end of the game where the game literally just gets out of Ludvig's way. The character has to get from A to B with very little in between. And it just allows him to open up musically and essentially pull at your heartstrings. Those are the moments that live with you. They're the moments that live with people. Like there's a lot of Death Stranding that I can't remember the specifics of, but I will always remember that moment. I will always remember the moment riding out into the field in Ghost of Tsushima. Moments are important because composers, usually with video games, we're confined to a very strict set of musical blocks that we need to fill. And every now and again, if you want that music to emotionally connect, you have to give us the moments to tell people why this music matters. Give us a moment in the game where we can musically put that. That's just me speaking there, by the way, just having my moment. But anyway, so
I think, that stuff is really important. I'd like to point out the very beginning of Doom 2016, cocking that shotgun in time with the music. It just really sets the mood for the music. It gives the music its identity very early on.
Exactly.
Yeah, that kind of stuff.
It gives the music the ability to explain its context to people. It gives it the opportunity for people to understand why the music's playing that theme or what is playing that thing, because hopefully you've allowed the composer an emotional moment to establish that, so that when it comes up later, when you hear that Ghost of Tsushima theme later, when you hear that BB theme that Ludvig's been hinting at the whole way through, and it has a moment, it makes sense and it emotionally connects. I think that's very important. But anyway, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. I would first like to thank my incredible panel for being here today and both sharing their insights and experience with us. I would also like to thank PAX for giving us the excuse to have this chat today. But most importantly, I would like to thank you guys at home for watching and supporting the video game industry. I hope you all had a great time today. I hope you all stay safe, and we will see you in the next one. Guys, would you like to say goodbye to our audience?
Hi, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thanks for coming.